All right, we're rolling. Oh yeah, welcome to the Metagov seminar. Today is October 23rd, and I'm, a fellow member of the Metagov community. My name's Nathan Hewitt. If this is your first time, welcome. This is a weekly event at Metagov, which is a digital governance lab featuring discussions on online governance with researchers and practitioners. This seminar was proposed by me in our Metagov seminar Slack channel. We encourage community members to propose and lead future seminars. Um, and yeah, we have, I'm one of the three presenters today. My name's Nathan Hewitt. I do financial nonprofit operations, freelance nonprofit operations and fiscal sponsorship, working with Metagov and Aspiration and Open Team, and a little bit. And also, I've written a little bit on the topic we're talking about today. We'll also have Tara Merk, a political science PhD candidate, researcher with Blockchain Gov, doing all kinds of interesting things around exit to community, working and also studying governance transitions. Oh, and a Metagov research fellow. And we'll have Joshua Tan, a mathematician and computer scientist, doing research on the intersections of all kinds of interesting things, including governance transitions and exit to community, governance, of course, and is a co-founder and former executive director of Metagov. I think I'm handing it off to Tara to share screen. Is that true? And go through the first part of the presentation. So yeah, let me hand it to you.
Thanks, Nathan. I'm gonna say I have a little bit of a lag, so can people just indicate if I am talking fluently and if you can see my screen, all that is working? All right. Um, Great. Well, then let me go into full screen. Um, and yeah, kick this off. Thanks so much for everybody for being here. I'm very excited today because this is obviously a project that we've been working on with a number of people across Metagov and also on this call, sort of for quite a while. The governance transition calculators. Today, Josh, Nathan, myself, and also Antonin. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Are going to be speaking a little bit on the project, but I see Sand and Liz and various others who have, in some capacity, already been part of this. So huge community thing. To kick it off, like, what do we want to do in this seminar? I'm going to run you through a little bit of the background since I'm, doing all this PhD academic research around governance transitions. I'll run you through that part of the calculator. I'll then pass it off to Josh and Antonin to demo the calculator itself and reflect a little bit on, or share reflections of, what it does for people who are using it. Some of our future plans for the tool itself, because we're very much not done with the project yet. And then we want to make sure to leave plenty of time for a discussion and getting your feedback, because just to put into perspective where we are is that we've sort of like produced a first prototype of this governance transition calculator, which we want to show, and written up a paper. And really, this is our last round of feedback for certain things to include in the paper. So we're very grateful for everybody here on the call. And please note any questions. We'll have time to talk about that later or put them in the chat. So starting with a little bit of the background, a governance transition calculator, you might wonder, who is this thing for? We have built it specifically for open source communities who want to change something in their governance. Here it's important to start by acknowledging that open source projects exist in various different sort of governance styles. There's a little 2x2 that I want to show here that Janani and colleagues, put together quite a while ago from observing open source projects and how they are governed. And they sort of identified that there is that these projects differ according or along two axes. The first one is the how open are they for commercial appropriation? So that's the bottom axis there. And then also how centralized or concentrated and distributed is their governance and leadership style. Now, the bottom two quadrants are sort of those types of projects where we have more centralized governance systems that could either be a sponsor base, so that would be an open source project that was sort of started by maybe a company or some sort of pre-existing organization that is predominantly maintained maybe by people working for a certain company, you know, that get part of their salary and time working in that company to contribute to that open source project. I think an excellent example here, also having Nathan on the call and knowing that a lot of the Metagov community is familiar with Open Collective, right, as a great example for a sponsor based where we do still have quite concentrated leadership and decision making happening. And then what we also do know, however, within open source is not just companies doing open source projects, but also individuals funding them. And here, of course, one of the go-to models of governing those open source projects is they call it tolerant dictator. I think the more popular term is the benevolent dictator for life, of course, originating from the Linux Foundation. So these are more community grown, in a sense, open source projects that nonetheless, have quite concentrated leadership and decision making. None of this is a normative sort of statement. This is not good or bad. However, the calculator is for projects that decide to transition from this more concentrated decision-making style into something that is more distributed. Denani et al. Here again acknowledge two different styles of what that might look like. I will broadly differentiate for those like who are a little bit into this ecosystem. Maybe the one is more the Linux Foundation model, where of course often you have like a lot of company consortia coming together around a certain open source project, and they're very much also looking to integrate that into, business solutions and are quite pragmatic around why they're choosing an open source license, versus more on the top right corner are these reciprocity-based projects that sort of like, it's maybe more with the radical original open source sentiment of projects that we sometimes associate with Apache Foundation, right? That don't want any commercial appropriation happening. Some of them also refuse sort of any institutionalization, but still are distributing governance and decision-making rights more broadly than we usually see in sponsor or BDFL governed open source projects. So the calculator is really for any project that is currently in the bottom half of this quadrant and is looking to transition to the top. Now, the big question is, why would you want to transition to the top half? I've put four reasons here of why that might make sense. One of the questions, so I just want to prompt that for the discussion later, that we have is, if you have more reasons and if you have experience about these transitions, why those happened, we'd be so curious to hear about them. Four that we found was security. So there was, for example, recently this the XUtils hack. I don't know if people heard about it. Essentially, an open source project that became quite important because it's, integrated in a lot of other pieces of software, but was ultimately maintained by one developer founder, a BDFL, who simply became a little bit overwhelmed with the job. This was a malicious attack where somebody else, started contributing to the mailing list, started becoming more involved, ultimately convinced this BDFL to give them common access, and then began committing sort of malicious code. What this incident shows is simply that there is a security risk if we rely on very few people that get to determine sort of what gets merged into the code and making major decisions on updates, and that it can really be beneficial for the security, especially of open source projects that are widely adopted, to sort of distribute that responsibility a little bit more broadly, and obviously underpin it with security best practices and processes. A second aspect that we're seeing, not just in open source, but everywhere in the economy, is that people start projects, but that doesn't mean they want to maintain them forever. Sometimes it's simply moving on to other things. Other times, also in the traditional economy, we see people who get older and might want to retire, and there's a problem of succession. Right? So just for the longevity and sustainability of some of these projects, it might make sense or be important to sort of transition into a different governance model, or from one person to another. And why not in that moment also broaden out the access, because especially in the BDFL model, right, these founding figures are relatively unique, and they don't usually turn up in the next generation, and we might want to distribute responsibility. Scalability, again, these centralized organizations and also BDFLs can become bottlenecks for decision making. We've seen this in a lot of large scale projects where it simply makes sense, and we know this from traditional companies. It makes sense at some point to bring in middle management and to distribute some of the responsibility and leadership. And then there's normative and personal reasons, right? That people come along and say, it's very much it feels better, or it feels more honest, if these projects are governed by the communities that they serve. So this, again, coming back maybe to the case of Open Collective, right? The announcement of we want to exit to community, and very recently, the transitioning of the Open Collective platform into a member-owned organization that gives members such as fiscal hosts using the technologies more official sort of governance and ownership rights in the project. So these are some of the reasons that we found why it's important, and why we want to understand moving from the bottom to the top in our little quadrant. This might be why you want to do it. The big question, however, that we're looking at with the calculator is, when should you do it, right? Because if we look at other governance transitions outside of open source, for example, taking a company public, or converting to a cooperative, or any sort of change that you do in a group of people, you want to make sure that you start implementing that change when you're ready, right? And our big question is sort of, when are open source projects ready, or how do they know that they're ready to transition their governance? And to start understanding that, we're sort of drawing on this conceptual framework from academia that is called organizational readiness to change. Now, organizational readiness to change here, I've just pulled up a definition, really is put together by two components. The first one is sort of that the members and the decision makers in a certain organizational context, there's a question of who are they feel like they're ready, and they exhibit a shared resolve, so motivation and sort of excitement and determination. We're going to do this. We want to change our governance structure, right, in an open source context. So there's simply a motivation to do that. And then the second aspect is really around, we, the decision makers or members of this organizational context, also are confident in our capability to implement this change, right? So we're not just motivated to do some utopian, I don't know what, but we're motivated to do something that we also truly believe we have the resources, the structures, right, and the people in place for this to be a successful transition. The organizational readiness to change literature, maybe this is a little bit interesting, it actually comes a lot from healthcare, where scientists found these, better healthcare interventions for a certain disease. It makes sense to switch to a different type of therapy, etc. And everybody agreed, like, this new therapy was the better route to go. It was more effective, more efficient, etc. However, as soon as it hit the actual healthcare context in a hospital or a clinic or wherever, we found that there was a lot of problems with implementing. So these guys took a very scientific, or a very health science approach to start trying to understand, how can we make this implementation more effective? And that's how they came up with this organizational readiness to change framework. And it wasn't just the framework, but they also wanted to apply it. So one of the things that people working with this concept have done over many, many years is start to come up with frameworks to measure the readiness within specific organizational contexts. If you see here on the right, this TCU organizational readiness for change. So this is one of very many frameworks that exist out there. They're usually structured as these sort of questionnaire type things, because they say there is a psychometric sort of assessment happening here because we want to understand confidence and motivation and things like that. So they do that, and then they compute some sort of score. Interestingly enough, if you look at the top here, this is something that I pulled out from Deloitte, that has done a very similar thing to try and assess if companies that they're consulting are ready to exit to a public market. So what I'm trying to say, there's some conceptual background as to what do we need, and then people try and operationalize it through these kinds of survey tools that measure some type of readiness. So what we have done is we've taken this concept, and we've taken the idea of having this sort of like tool, which we're calling this calculator, which is going to calculate your readiness. And we've applied it not to the healthcare context or the education context where it exists a lot more, but to the space of open source governance transitions, to build our own sort of calculator. Again, then how did we build the calculator? We drew from that literature where the general heuristic, this is pretty straightforward, to building such a framework is always 3 steps. You need to somehow assess the motivation of a community, and here I've already adapted it to the open source context. You need to assess the motivation of a community to want to transition to community governance. This we've simply, and you're going to see that when Josh runs you through the demo, we straight up ask, do you feel energized? Are you motivated, right? Like these are some of the questions within the calculator. Then we need to assess sort of the general capabilities within the organization to transition. For this, we actually looked quite widely into any other organizational transition that we know of where we're going from more centralized leadership and decision-making to something that is more distributed. And this, for us, again, includes the IPO, where you're selling and transitioning decision-making rights to shareholders, right? However, these shareholders are a very different thing than maybe an open source community, because there's more of a financial interest rather than actually a sense of belonging to a certain thing. However, we wanted to understand here, is there a certain structures and high-level things that we can maybe apply in the calculator. We also then try to, of course, go beyond sort of the idea of a financial shareholding community to something that is more a stewardship community, therefore looking more at steward ownership transitions and cooperative conversions, right, where it's more people with a sense of belonging to the project that take on governance rights. And then third of all, or like the third thing that any framework needs to have, is some specific context-specific capabilities. For us, that was, of course, the open source software context, where we drew heavily on things like chaos metrics, Apache Foundation graduation materials. So any sorts of open source maturity model out there that we could find that also incorporated really this governance perspective, and trying to implement those into the tool. Now, I want to put here at the bottom the thing, or I want to point out that the people who came up with the organizational readiness to change concept in a lot of these frameworks, a lot of them are very disillusioned right now, is sort of what we found reading around. And they're disillusioned because they love precisely measuring things. And maybe this also with the context of coming from, you know, health science, things like that, where it is often possible to measure very well. And people are disappointed that none of the many frameworks, I think there's more than 80 frameworks out there, have to date done a very good job in, you know, in their validity to measure something. And we sort of acknowledge that issue of saying like, all right, this is going to be extremely hard to precisely pin down or have like in a statistic validity sort of way. But that doesn't mean that it's not useful to have this kind of framework. And here we turn more to this idea of action research that says like, this calculator isn't a tool for giving us just a number, right? This calculator is a tool for doing something within a community context. And ideally, what we want to be doing with this calculator in a community is start to anchor a conversation around making this decision, right? Because if we start without any structure or framework guiding, then then deciding do we want to transition governance might become quite a broad and potentially unfocused, unstructured sort of conversation, and becomes very hard to feel like you've made a good decision when you do transition. So just summing that up very briefly, looking at these governance transitions in open source, we think there's a number of reasons why they are important today and will be becoming more and more important, especially as existing founder leaders of projects, want to step back. We're drawing on this organizational readiness to change framework and sort of appropriating everything that they've learned from contexts such as healthcare and education to this open source context. We don't just want to measure something, but we really want to integrate it into a sort of workshopping format and as a way to help people by using the tool, discussing their different results, feel more ready and more confident and comfortable in their decision to change things. So I'm going to pass it on to Josh. And here's I can probably, Josh, do you want to share your screen to do the demo? Or?
Yeah, probably makes more sense for me to share my screen.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let me share it. Where did the thing go? All right. So first things first, you can go right now to your just ignore all the tabs. Don't look at my terrible tab management. So you can go to to.community right now, and you'll see there's a bunch of kind of different little research projects that we've been up to as part of this kind of larger project involving many people, including obviously Tara, but Seth, Divya, Nathan, Patrick Shafto at the IAS, and Luke, who secretly runs Metagov, for those of you who are new to the community. But in particular, you can just click on transition calculators here and start testing and playing around with the calculator yourself. And so I'll go now and kind of run this through with you for the case of DAOstar. So for those of you who don't know, DAOstar, if you go to daostar.org, is it's an open source set of standards and specifications that Metagov has authored or led the authoring of. And we've been talking about kind of exiting that to community or transitioning the governance of that for a while. So I'll just run through this exercise, hopefully in not too much time. And so you can kind of get a sense of how we do it for one entire sort of pass through. So DAOstar is in this case, it's actually a company built open source project because it's kind of effectively owned by Metagov. So I'm going to use this, but in principle, you could also say BDFL. Bam, section 1. All right, so I pre-filled this in, so we don't have to take, we can kind of move a little bit faster. Yes, I personally feel energized to lead a transition / E2C. I would really like to see this happen within the time constraints of my own time, of course. And the reality here is that, I manage other things at Metagov and outside of Metagov. So this is one of those things, like I'm very cognizant of the fact that like my own capacity is going to be a finite resource in how to execute this, which is something that, is going to be a big part of whether this is successful or not. Is the DAO community involved in this decision in the DAOstar community? So obviously the internal sort of group in DAOstar is definitely aware of this and been supporting the process the entire time. But the external DAO community, I think, is just starting to become aware of this. So they're just getting them on board and onboarding them into that process is something that we're going to be doing over the next couple of conferences. So something I'm going to say no on, but we're definitely working toward. Have I decided on an organizational governance structure that will result? Not really. This is something that we kind of need to work out with the community. Have the motivations and expected outcomes been discussed so that everyone is aware of each other's needs and expectations? Sort of, like we've talked with various decision makers in the DAO community, but this is not something that like everybody is like super on top of yet. Have you identified everyone legally required to make the decision? Yes. This is just folks in Metagov. Have you identified who the future owners and stewards? Yes. Basically every DAO. And we do, because of the work we do at DAOstar, we kind of track every DAO, or most DAOs, a lot of DAOs, the big DAOs. So we kind of have an idea who exactly these people will be. Do you feel your project is facing difficulties and a governance transition is the only way to resolve the issue? Yes and no. I said yes here just because this is something that, we do think this is an important part of what Dastar needs to be effective. I mean, technically, we could go on doing what we're doing, but I personally feel this is something that is critical to the organization and the project. And do you know how to control the flow after your transition? No. All right, it's going to take, it takes some time to go through these things. Does your project, I'll just go through another few pages, and then maybe we'll kind of like skip through to the end. You can kind of see the output. So and I actually haven't looked at all of these yet, so you're going to go through with me. Does DASTAR document how contributors earn more rights such as commit access or decision power and apply those principles consistently? No, we have not formalized how this actually works. It lives basically in my head somewhere. Is decision-making power in your project distributed in a transparent way? I mean, we do have a hierarchy in that sense because of the company, right? Otherwise, anybody can submit what's called a DAO IP, a technical specification. And I think that is fairly clear. Actually, it's all written up in DAO IP1, which kind of specifies how that system works. So yes. But weirdly enough, yeah, not at the editorial level, not at the sort of the GitHub permissions level. Do you and your community have a clear shared understanding what it is that you are governing? Yes. Can anyone using standard wire build the code in a reproducible way? Yes. The full, yes. Document a repeatable release process. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to say no, just to be honest. Are we open and honest about the quality of our code? Wow, these are really hard questions. I'm going to say maybe yes. Does your proven on producing secure software? We are authoring a security standard with all the best security people in the DAO ecosystem. So I'm going to say yes. No, it's in progress. All right, let's just say no for now. All right, I'm going to just say like yes to all these things and just like give myself the benefit of the doubt. So you're not like sitting here with me forever. All right. And do we document the copyright ownership? Yes. Are we guiding the transition? Yes. Well, actually, okay, mostly yes. All right. How are we doing? Exit readiness. We are doing well on the participatory culture and the leadership. I'm going to pat myself on the back right now. But the strategy and planning is doing okay, but we're not doing so hot on governance because we don't really know what the end result is going to be. And our internal systems definitely need some improvement. And our legal and regulatory also sadly missing. So anyways, that kind of gives you a kind of quick window into how this might be useful. And also, the opportunity to give feedback because, we all love giving feedback and making open source projects better. So please do, if you fill out this short survey, put it in there. I'll just mention this is, we are adding a few modules, or at least one module to this. There will be a cost analysis that kind of assigns, if you wanted to take it from here to here, how much time and energy is that likely to cost you based on a benchmark of some existing data that we've kind of made up partly sourced from other data sets. So hopefully that will give you a little bit more better window into like if you wanted to move this up, how much is that going to cost in terms of time and energy? All right, that's it. I'll stop.
So I can jump in for this part. I think we didn't talk about this transition in the thank you so much, Josh, for sharing, giving us a little demo of the calculator. And I'll add that we're planning to surface your responses to you at the end as well. So that's something that will be added so that you can look at it. And we have someone else who's gone through the calculator with their own project in focus. And is it Antina? Are you willing to come on mic? And we would just love to hear from you like any kind of, and I don't even know what the feedback is. We would love to hear like what kind of feedback you have on the calculator, how it felt to go through it with your project in focus. Like, yeah, give us the real take on how you felt working with it.
Sure. So maybe to give a bit of background before I give my impressions of the calculator, maybe it's helpful to give an overview of my situation. So I'm your sort of average open source maintainer working on an average open source project with a very messy governance. Essentially, we're a bit of a mixture of BDFL and sort of committee-run project, self-appointed committee. And we've noticed that we don't have a good way to onboard people onto those responsibilities. And we also are not completely sure what the scope of the project is. Sometimes there's a bit of tensions around that as well. So it's clear that we need a change of governance. I think most people would agree with that. It's not clear at all where we want to go, though. So we've been discussing about that, and I discovered the calculator last week, so I was very intrigued. I have to say I can really relate to Tara's remarks on the intuitive perception of calculators, because my intuitive reaction is like, oh no, not another flaky personality test. I don't want to go through this thing. It's not going to give me any useful outcome. That's my sort of intuitive gut feeling when you tell me I have a calculator for you. But with this negative bias in the first place, I still went through it, and I was I found it very useful. Not so much for the score at the end, of course, because as we know, it's not so easy to measure those things, but just the process of going through the questions and having to think about them was extremely insightful. I would say there were plenty of things I was like, yes, well, we definitely didn't think about that, and we should. So that's a bit of a wake-up call. I have to say, at the end, my results were much smaller than Josh, so it was also a bit disappointing and a bit, yeah, not so sure how to continue with that. But I think, yeah, it's a very useful exercise. At least for me, it felt like a good use of my time for sure. I don't know if you want me to expand more on certain topics, but that would be my take.
Tara, I don't remember how much more presentation we have that we wanted to give. I want to just think about the amount of time that I have to talk to Antina. How much more presenting are we doing before we move into the Q&A?
We really just wanted to give one more future outlook, which Josh already hinted at the cost modules. And then maybe I can say one more thing about the workshops, but I think it's
Okay.
interesting to hear more from Antina.
Yeah, Antina, I would love to hear like what kinds of, you talked about how it was kind of like prompting you to be like, oh, I haven't done these things. Do you have some idea, like, are there some next steps that have popped up for you as a result of working with it, or are you still in this place of kind of like just sitting with the results and sitting with the different areas of improvement or preparation, I should say?
I think overall it just prompts me to try to get a lot more buy-in on some things I assumed without questioning them. I mean, primarily this is all happening in good part because I want to step out and I want to make sure there are people taking over the responsibilities I have, and I realize because of this broken onboarding pipeline, we don't really have so many people who are ready to step in. So for me, the answer is really, well, okay, I actually need to try to get that fixed and delay my step out so that this can happen in a more fluid way. That's perhaps the big takeaway.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, and appreciate you kind of being put on the spot. I'm wondering if anyone else has questions or thoughts yet for Antina. Go ahead, the person with your hand up.
Oh, hi, my name is Ofer. I was wondering if this can be used also in a more hostile situation. For example, I'm thinking about what's happening right now in Twitter that, it's really kind of like feel that this failure to transition from there is a horrible community failure in such a terrible situation. And I was thinking that for users to unionize and move from X, say, to their own platform, the main issues is really readiness. So one issue is, of course, getting critical mass of people so that you'll have, so say that you already got 10 million people wanting to leave Twitter. It's not enough, right? I mean, we need to make sure that whatever is there that we want to try is ready. So I'm thinking about this calculator as part of experimenting before clicking a button and everyone transitioning, like doing it much more slowly than people try to do. Do you think that that's applicable for that?
Maybe I can speak to that. So I think the short answer is I wish. That would be like, that sounds actually like a really cool idea of, are we as an online community ready to sort of fork, or I don't know, start the revolution, what have you, transition out of an environment that is not good anymore. I don't think the way that we've, like, that would be a really cool idea, and it would be great maybe to have more tools and guidance for people to come to shared decisions on doing that, because of course also we've seen with like Mastodon, after Elon took over Twitter, right, there was this wave, but there was also all these other networks, and there seems to be a bit of coordination maybe lacking on where are we going next. So it's an interesting question. I don't think our calculator is maybe the most applicable for the scenario that you describe. However, what we have sort of discovered in conversation with people who are, deeply embedded in the open source community and working within it, is that maybe this calculator could also function as a tool, and especially including maybe these cost modules, to sort of make a good argument towards companies, for example, who currently hold open source projects, to sort of like, how do you say, spin them out of
You mean
their
to negotiate the terms or something like that?
Exactly. To sort of be like, hey, you seem to be in a good position. Also, the valuation maybe of this project, this is a very, it's a very different aspect, but sort of to show that this project has been integrated in so many different places, it's become really a critical component. It would, ensure safety and maybe sustainability of this project, and also trustworthiness if you get more stakeholders involved into the governance and decision-making module. The cost of that is overseeable, and sort of to make a good argument why more open source should be governed by a community or in a multi-stakeholder sort of way. So that's definitely something that we've heard from people. It's a little bit different, but yeah.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add is that I think that the main issue that people always don't talk about is that the clunky user interface is a major issue, right? So you can come up with answering all those questions and still have a shitty platform. I mean, making a good social media platform require amazing ingenuity in engineering and huge investment, in the big data and everything. So it seems to me that it would be nice to kind of like look at it as only part of this big picture, because otherwise it's failing, I think, if it's not including the user experience and the capacity to engineer it well.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why definitely I don't think our calculator is applicable to that situation in particular. So I think that would take a little bit more. Yeah.
I do think that the calculator has a lot of, like, could be a nice prompt for certain questions to talk about in that situation. There are a lot of the questions are about how working better together. And so in that sense, I think going through the questions can help, think about what a collectively governed platform will need to have in place, but it's a little bit, yeah, the calculator is not built for purpose built for that. Josh, see your hand up.
No, I'll just say briefly that there are like 60 plus variables or questions kind of that we've tracked, not all of which actually made it to the final calculator that you've seen in the demo. And some of those is kind of designed to capture stuff or sort of like exit to community type scenarios that don't look like open source, that maybe are to DAOs or company to company or other kinds of transitions. So I'm saying there's like, we have identified, it would be really awesome to build additional calculators on top of the same framework using some of these same assets for other ETC style scenarios. And maybe this is something we could eventually generalize to.
Thanks, Josh. I have some prompts for the group, but before I do, I'm wondering if there are any other like questions, comments that are arising from everyone. And then maybe we can save discussing future plans for actually kind of like after this discussion moment. Something I'm wondering is if anyone here has, and I can also share my experience, but I want to see if others do first, has experience like working on an open source decentralization and open source governance transition like this. And if you have, if you wanted to share about your experience and like what some of the challenges were. Because you just never know. They're always kind of like hiding. I'll share briefly that one of the things that has drawn me to this project is my experience with Open Collective. And if those of you who have been paying attention to the exit to community space may have run into different writing that Open Collective did about in exit to community. And there's lots of things that I could say about it. And they actually recently announced that they're finally moving forward with a governance transition. But the piece I wanted to share is that in those early days, after we decided that we wanted to do it and publicly said that we'd wanted to do it, there was a moment where we were really seeking something to hold on to, some sort of like grounding framework. And we went and talked to folks who were writing about it, talking about E2C, the E2C collective and other folks. We talked to the Purpose Foundation people. And in the end, we found a consultant who was willing to do a feasibility study with us. And the feasibility study felt really good because in the moment, because it's like, oh no, we're actually progressing towards doing an E2C because we're figuring out exactly what needs to happen with the money. And we come out of this feasibility study process and we have this 40-page report on all the finances. And then we go to our coworkers and they're like, what the hell, guys? Like, what is this? Like, we haven't talked about this at all. We haven't, this isn't like, what are we doing? Like, what is they had all these questions that are not answered at all by the feasibility study. And it was such a jarring experience for me. And of course, you zoom out and it's like, oh, that makes complete sense, Nathan. Like, how could you not figure that out? How did you not see that coming? But my sense is that there's a lot of value in this. Yeah, from the perspective of action research, or the way I would talk about it is from the perspective of facilitation, that this tool has a lot of value when used in a workshop setting by a facilitator that is framing it and creating containers and structures around it for it not just to be a quiz, to actually take the answers of the quiz and the differences in answers between people and like actually apply it and use it to help people move towards their goals of some sort of exit to community. So I shifted from both. I was both facilitator and respondent there. But I'm wondering, do let me know if anyone else has experiences with this. Another question I have is like, what kinds of what we talked about the motivations for an exit to community. We talked about sustainability, security, There was another S. Sustainability, security, and scalability, and then also kind of the normative cultural differences. I'm also open if anyone's, oh, sexiness. Yeah. Uh, thank you. Bumblefudge in the chat. Are there other reasons that you can think of or like purposes that you can think that are strong for you around like why this kinds of transition is important? I'm just quizzing everyone. Josh, I saw your hand up before.
So I also do want to hear from everybody else as well. But something that you said that made me think is, yeah, so like designing for a facilitator style experience would probably entail, like, suggest that we might want to make some changes to the UX of the calculator, right? Have ways of saving or exporting prompts, the ability to kind of compare these things. It kind of suggests like there are other kind of platforms that kind of like maybe we could borrow or use the code of, or just implement the calculator in those things to kind of enable collaborative test taking, which could be cool. Or just, yeah, just having, we've talked also already about having more like, contextual cues inside the calculator, for, in the actual sort of test taking itself that could potentially be geared toward facilitation. But anyways, just some ideas. I really like sort of that direction about how to improve the calculator.
Sarah, do you want to share the slides? I know I kind of like messed with our plan here, but do you want to go ahead and share the slides about the future kind of like things we're planning and yeah, updates?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've sort of covered it all. I can pull them up again, but essentially, really just what we wanted to talk about is these two things, and that's maybe also one of Nathan's that I know last questions. We wanted to understand more reasons. I love the credibility and also the sexiness, sort of reasons to add to our list of S stuff plus normative, for why to transition. That was one question, and then yeah, what do we want to do in the future is to integrate this more. I think this is maybe a question that I just also want to pop to Antonin. In terms of like, you were the only person from your project filling out the calculator right now, or did you do it? Exactly. So I think a little bit of what we've done now of just like putting this out into the world, it's not perfect by any standard, is not where it necessarily needs to be, but it needs to be in community and in groups of people who are making a decision together. And we really want to put in some more effort and work to build that workshop. And that might mean, as Josh said, improving the UX of the tool, but it definitely also requires a little bit of like training ourselves to become, good facilitators of using the tool with a group of people. So that's something that we want to do. And for that, of course, also we need communities who want to help us learn to do a good job. And, train the trainer, put the tool out there and make it useful in those contexts. If you know anybody who is thinking about a transition to distribute leadership and governance more broadly in their open source project, please, please, please do let us know. We'd love to hear or get in contact with them. Not sure if anybody here is part of such a project. That would be absolutely fantastic. And then the other thing really that I just want to paint again is this idea of like, this is a first part of a bigger framework that should help people make a decision in an environment where there aren't that many tools available yet, or frameworks or guardrails, that sort of help you make a decision that feels informed. There's always risk involved, right? So we want to add more modules and guardrails and things that can help people feel supported and then ultimately confident in what they're doing and structure their thinking around the decisions. And that includes these cost modules that Josh mentioned, but also sort of assessing the value of the project we're talking about, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a little bit in the future for us, and that would have been the end of the presentation. So we've done everything. Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you, Tara. I'm kind of wondering, are there any is there anyone that's like, I don't know about this? Is there anyone that's saying like, hey, I think that this doesn't work, or there's some limitation of this? Is there any, yeah, if there's any of that energy in the room, I would love to call it forth and hear where it's coming from.
I would jump in and say the costing extension would make it a lot more powerful to ask for the money to do the thing in situations, particularly in situations where there's a DAO or a treasury involved, because like it's very easy for 90% for the rest of the org or the rest of the voters to vastly underestimate how much labor is involved in anything legal, compliance, organizational, and just to be able to say like, hey, we used this generic thing rather than like pay a consultant to tell us how much it's going to cost. We used this calculator, and it said we should budget like, 100 hours of this kind of labor and 100 hours of this kind of labor. Here's a DAO proposal, like the 100 for this, we've got this contractor, the 100 for this, you can just pay, I'll just take this much out of the treasury and pay myself. I think that would really operationalize this for a lot of people who are sort of like struggling to get the DAO vote behind them when they do these kinds of things. I think that next step will make it really turnkey, which is not exactly what you asked, but it's just the thing I wanted to volunteer.
Thank you. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, I just also have a random comment. First of all, is there start.coop? Have you looked at them at all and seen, is there anything in their work that's related at all to what you're doing? Are you familiar with them? And then the second thing is just, I mean, the reality is that, collective distributed organizations are hard to run. The decision-making tools are hard, and all the other tools, like the one we're using right now, are bad. So it's just limited by a lot of those factors, the immaturity of decision tools and just remote coordination in general.
So maybe I can, I think that's really interesting. We have looked into start.coop, but if you're familiar with them and if you know that if they have any more frameworks and toolings that are sort of comparable or can help, then it would be amazing if you can send those over, because
yeah, I'm not so familiar with them. I was more just asking you if they were working on similar things. But it's start.coop.
Yeah.
I'm actually familiar with them, and have had some, not as part of this project. So this project hasn't had contact with start.coop, but I've had discussions with them around tooling. They're of course focused on cooperatives and helping projects. Actually, it's in the name, isn't it? Helping projects start. And so previously I've started some work with them on creating tooling to help people choose what kind of entity they wanted to create. They're not so focused on governance transitions, but definitely appreciate you bringing them into the room, because they're definitely parallel in a lot of ways. And actually, I don't know of any tools that they've publicly posted, but it's the type of thing we would definitely take cues from if we ran into it, for sure. Oh, you're muted, Steve.
Brad DeGraff is working with them as well now, if you guys know.
Oh, cool. Great. We have just a minute left. Do we have any other questions, comments, thoughts before we close? Well, thank you so much to Josh, to Tara, especially to Antona for volunteering your experience, and to you all for attending. We're going to keep working on this project, and all of your feedback and comments are we're grateful for them, and we welcome any future ones, and especially would love to hear about any open source projects that might be interested in trying or having a workshop. Josh, I saw you raise your finger. Did you want to say something?
Nathan, this is since you're new to hosting these seminars.
Oh,
I
yeah.
want to just remind folks of our tradition. I'll let you actually, maybe you do. So I'll let you handle it.
No, I don't. What? Remind me.
Oh, the tradition is as our way of showing appreciation in these vast virtual spaces, try to bring a little bit of human touch. In the next 3 seconds, I would ask everybody to please unmute and give a round of applause for, I guess, certainly Tara, Nathan, for an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. 3, 2, 1, go. Hey. Oh, actually, an innovation to this, and I'll just make a suggestion for next time. I've heard people, somebody else on a previous version of this insisted not only on clapping out loud, but saying clap, 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 which turns out to be actually kind of hilarious. I invite us to try this at the next seminar. All right, wonderful. Clap, clap, clap. Thanks, folks. Thanks, everyone. Good seeing you all.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Clap, clap, clap.